welcome to the very first episode of Between the Clouds, the podcast where we live, build, and troubleshoot in the space between private and public cloud environments. I'm your host, Brandon Lee, founder of virtualizationhowto.com, longtime home labber, VMware vExpert, and someone who's spent a lot of time getting hands-on with everything from ESXi clusters, Proxmox clusters, to containerized LLMs running in mini PCs, to AWS serverless technologies. The name Between the Clouds comes from the reality that most of us live in. Whether you're managing a hybrid cloud for an enterprise or hacking away in a home lab, you're constantly working between private infrastructure and public cloud services. And navigating that space comes with its own set of challenges, wins, and lessons. Each week on the show, I'll be diving into the latest blog posts that I myself have written or just interesting things that we would like to share, what I've learned, what surprised me, and what didn't work quite the way that I expected it to. After all, it seems that we learn much more from our failures than we do our successes. I'll also cover current news and trends in the world of virtualization, cloud, home labs, security, AI workloads, and beyond. And of course, I'll sprinkle in some tools, tips, and community highlights that I think are worth your time. Whether you're running a Kubernetes cluster in your garage, building your own Proxmox server from spare parts, spinning up AWS or Azure virtual machines, containers, Kubernetes clusters, or simply figuring out how to run Ollama with GPU pass-through on a $400 mini PC, this show is for you. So thanks for tuning in to this pilot episode. Let's dive in and get started. I'm really happy that you found this podcast. I thought for this episode, one of the things that I would really like to highlight on a set cadence, and I'm going to experiment with this with the podcast and, just see what the feedback is with this. I write prolifically about many different solutions, many times self-hosted solutions, open source solutions, pay for solutions, other solutions that I feel bring a tremendous amount of value to readers and listeners and those that watch my YouTube videos. And I seem to have gotten a lot of interest with a recent post just a few weeks back covering the topic of using an extremely old GPU for AI and experimenting with AI in the home lab. And when I say old, I am talking on the neighborhood of 10 years old. I had a GeForce GTX 1060, and I believe this card is circa 2016. And in 2016 and a year or two after that, this was a popular card that many threw into gaming workstations and what have you. However, this card by technology years is like 100 years old, if you want to think of it that way. And I wanted to, for no better reason than to satisfy my own curiosity, I wanted to see just how well a GPU of this class, of this vintage, as the NVIDIA GTX 1060 card is, 10 years old. It's got 6 gigs of video RAM. How well could it run local LLMs in 2025, 10 years later almost? Well, surprisingly, very well. I was actually taken aback, in fact, at just how well this card was able to handle some of the processing of running LLMs locally using Ollama and Open Web UI. Now, I think the reason I wanted to try this was I think many, like myself, you get into the mindset when you think about AI and AI workloads or self-hosting AI that you have to have the most recent, greatest, most video memory GPU that you can get at that particular time to install inside your AI workstation. Now, are you going to be disappointed in your AI performance if you buy the latest and greatest graphics processor? No. Absolutely not. If you don't have $2,000 or even more to spare for something that is built for AI or is the latest graphics processing unit, can something old actually suffice? Well, here's what I tested with. I had that GeForce GTX 1060 in the closet, pulled it out. I coupled that inside a server running a AMD Ryzen 9 7945HX processor. Now, granted, this little processor is not super old. I think it's 2023 vintage. It's a 16 core, 32 thread AMD Ryzen 9 processor. And so granted, and arguably this processor has quite a bit of horsepower. Now the host OS that I used was Ubuntu Server 2404 running as a Proxmox virtual machine. And I stepped through enabling PCI pass-through on this virtual machine. The VM was assigned 8 processors, and I also gave it around 20 gigs of system memory from Proxmox. Ollama was installed. I used just the Ollama official bash script in the virtual machine, and you can also use LXC containers. I've written about both of those methods, either using a virtual machine for Ollama or using an LXC container for Ollama and still passing that GPU through to the LXC container. You can do both, and arguably the LXC container is lighter weight, maybe the method that you want to actually use if you decide you want to spin up your own Ollama and open web UI environment. Now, I was using, at the time of the writing, the CUDA version for the driver was 570. It was a native Linux driver at version 570. So I installed the driver inside the virtual machine that I was passing through this GeForce GTX 1060. What were my observations? Well, I had some interesting observations, I would say, with the old GPU. Number one, I was surprised that it actually was sufficient, at least, to run a few chat queries. I was using models like Mistral 7B, I was using Gemma 2B, I was using Tiny Llama. So I was using those very small LLMs, and the key to that was I wanted to make sure that these models fit within the memory that I had available to the GTX 1060, because we all know this. If you've played around with AI and offloading your AI processing to your GPU, the performance just absolutely goes to a crawl for the most part if the model is larger than the amount of memory that you have on your GPU. So do keep that in mind. All in all, I had some really great observations with this 1060. For instance, Mistral 7B, I was able to see 27.73 tokens per second. Gemma 2B, I was able to achieve 22.55 tokens. Tiny Llama was around 30 plus tokens per second. Now, are those numbers blazing fast? No, but if you're using this for just short prompts, for starting to experiment with AI, in my opinion, this is a really great find, at least for myself personally, that you don't necessarily have to have the latest and greatest video card to at least be content and satisfied with the performance that you're getting. Now, if you're doing much more complex LLM testing and working with AI in a more serious way, of course, you want to have a more powerful card. But I just wanted to share those findings with the audience that the GeForce GTX 1060 was actually very adequate in processing. Another really interesting tool that I would like to highlight for the episode is a tool that is called NetAlertX. NetAlert is a self-hosted network monitoring solution for home labs. Now, NetAlertX was something that I saw on Lawrence Systems. Tom Lawrence at Lawrence Systems, he does a fantastic job of highlighting many of these really great little tools, and I was curious to see for myself, because I use a combination of things on my home network, such as ARP Alert and other tools that fulfill some of these requirements for me, letting me know what devices are on the network. So that is the whole premise behind NetAlertX. If you've not heard about it, or if you've not played around with it in the home lab as of yet, NetAlertX, it's a free and open source solution. And if you've ever tried the solution called PyAlert, and I have written about that, I think a couple or 3 years ago, I brought PyAlert into the lab and played around with it for a couple of days. The interface looks a lot like PyAlert, but someone has forked the PyAlert project and has taken it to a whole other level. I mean, NetAlert has a lot of features that definitely, I think, make it worth taking a serious look at if you're looking for cool and very slick network security solutions. In fact, just a few of the features of NetAlertX. It provides scanning in real time. It uses ARP, it uses DHCP, ping, ICMP, and Nmap. just to name a few. It also recognizes change detection. So if you have changes in IPs or MAC addresses, host names, or open ports, you can also send notifications to around 80 plus services. What I like about this is it's not just an email only solution. The developer has also thought about modern notification solutions like Apprise or Telegram or Pushover, just to name a few of those. So I really like that. Lots of notification options. It's also got a network topology dashboard that's built in, plugin support that you can enable or disable plugins. It's also got multi-instance sync across VLANs or subnets. And for many of you that run Home Assistant or Pi-hole, you'll be interested to know that this solution actually has integration with Home Assistant and Pi-hole. So really great functionality there. It's easy to spin up in Docker. I wrote about this in my blog post, a few lines of Docker run command, or you can, of course, create a Docker Compose YAML file and spin this up in Docker Compose. Just mount a couple of volumes, and the default port is port 2211. Once you spin up the container, you just simply navigate there and you start setting up the solution. That is NetAlertX. I really think it's worth a shout out and something that you definitely would like to get into the home lab, play around with it, and see how it can improve your home lab and network security. Also, I know many are in the process or would like to transition from a traditional IT admin to a DevOps engineer. And that is a very worthwhile goal to work towards in 2025. I think we are seeing, especially since Broadcom has raised the pricing, the licensing for VMware vSphere to such a point that many enterprise organizations are looking elsewhere. A few years back, before Broadcom bought VMware, when we think about it, it was very easy to go to C-level execs and say, you know, we can run all of this infrastructure much, much more cheaply on premises than we can in the cloud. And that was an easy sell. However, now that you have Broadcom license increases from 3x to 10x, it definitely has shifted the thought process, I think, with organizations on their cloud footprint. And if they were holding back on migrating to cloud or making that cloud transition, that reservation 5 years ago with saving much cost by staying on premises has now basically gone away with the price increases with VMware. Now, why am I speaking to VMware more than really any other solution? From the simple fact that VMware vSphere houses some 75 million virtual machine workloads, at least according to VMware's numbers with those statistics. So that is a massive amount of virtual resources spread across enterprise data centers all over the world. If we think about shifting from something like VMware vSphere, cloud makes a lot of sense, especially if organizations are looking at refactoring, becoming more modern workload focused, and engineering and architecting their applications as such. It makes migrating to the cloud now much more attractive, in my honest opinion. What are the ways that we as traditional IT admins can transition to the role of a DevOps engineer? Well, I think first and foremost, and I'm a huge advocate of this, is build a home lab. I think this is one of the single most important things that you can do for your career, period. Whether you're going into DevOps, cybersecurity, whatever the case is, building a home lab allows you to invest in your skills in a way that you set the pace and you determine the technologies, not your employer. So time and again, I see individuals that go from very little experience to one of the most intelligent engineers that you can work with. And you ask them, what are you doing differently? How are you learning? And they will tell you, well, I built myself a home lab. I've got XYZ that I'm learning. I'm troubleshooting. I'm evaluating solutions. I am re-architecting my network. All of those things come together to accelerate the learning process. And I've seen this time and again with those I've worked with. I've experienced it personally. Do build that home lab. Number two, start learning Git and incorporate it into traditional tasks even. You might say to yourself, well, I'm not a developer. Why would I ever start using Git? I don't code every day. Well, start getting into that mindset. Git is a fantastic tool and methodology that can be used regardless of whether you're a developer, a software application developer. And if you want to start thinking about DevOps in general, and you want to start thinking about infrastructure as code, which is an integral part of being a DevOps engineer, the Git process, Git repositories are a total central piece to that puzzle. So start learning Git, incorporate that in traditional tasks, such as just your documentation. If you are maintaining a set of documents or spreadsheets or other types of tangible files that you're using to document or make note of things, start putting that into a Git repo. And that way it will be an easy way that you can see the benefits of versioning, how the Git process works, how you push your files, how you pull changes back down, how you synchronize those changes, running commits, those types of things. So it's just a really great way to start getting into that DevOps mindset. Number 3, I think that tags along very closely with that, is starting to learn Docker and containers in general. This is one of the most important skills, I think, that separate a traditional IT infrastructure engineer from a DevOps engineer. A DevOps engineer understands containers, containerized workloads, and how those fit into the infrastructure footprint. And when you start getting into things like CI/CD, how containers are intertwined with CI/CD processes and those types of workflows. So definitely build a home lab, spin up a Docker container host, get your feet wet with Docker containers. One of the best things that you will ever do for your career. And then learning things like Docker Compose, learning this mindset of stacks of containers, and then also things like Docker Swarm. And then the next logical step is Kubernetes, which we'll mention in just a moment. Next, I would say get familiar with working with YAML files. YAML files are everywhere in DevOps, whether it's Kubernetes manifest, whether it's CI/CD pipelines, Ansible configuration management. YAML files are the configuration language that most of those tools and technologies use. Number 5, I would say, is starting to use AI. When I say that, I'm not saying totally use AI for everything and don't learn anything. Just simply type everything in a chat prompt. That's not what we're saying. Use AI in an intelligent way. And one of the things that I have thought about AI over the past 2-3 years now is that AI can be absolutely one of the best mentors, best tutors that we could ever have. Think about it. You actually now have the ability to bounce questions, any types of questions that you have, off of something that is smarter than we are personally about technologies like Kubernetes, Docker, writing code, infrastructure as code. All of those things, we can bounce ideas off of AI. And it makes for a experience that I have likened to that. It's like having that experienced tutor that you can, and mentor that you can bounce those ideas off of and learn from that. So don't replace your learning with AI, but replace how you learn with AI. And I think you will see massive benefits there. Number 6 in this list, I would say, is learn infrastructure as code like Terraform and Ansible. We've already mentioned this, but Terraform is the de facto standard, I would say, in provisioning infrastructure, both on premises and in the cloud when it comes to infrastructure as code. And then Ansible is that same de facto standard when it comes to configuration management. Learning both of those will be a tremendous benefit to your transition from a traditional IT admin over to a DevOps engineer. And we mentioned Kubernetes. The next in the list, number 7, would be learn Kubernetes. Any DevOps engineer interview or skills assessment, they will want you to know about Kubernetes. They'll want you to know the ins and outs of it, how to manage it, how to spin up applications, how to interact with it, and configure things inside of Kubernetes. It's the de facto standard of how to run containers at scale. So again, getting familiar with it and also using AI along with learning Kubernetes is a tremendous benefit. We've already talked about the traditional chat GPT type prompts. However, Google just recently released a very cool tool called kubectl-AI. And kubectl-AI allows you to tie into the API interface of ChatGPT, Google Gemini, or even your own local LLMs via Ollama. So you can tie into all of those AI resources, and literally from the command prompt, you can start typing questions. How do I provision an Nginx pod, and how do I expose port 80? It will literally spit out the steps and troubleshooting or workflows that you need to think about doing inside of the command prompt. So you're not having to open your ChatGPT window, ask a question, copy code, paste it back down to your terminal. It makes that a lot easier. Number 8, I would say, is starting learning CI/CD pipelines. And I'm a huge advocate for CI/CD. I think even a lot of the legacy scheduled tasks that we have seen scheduled on Windows servers or Linux servers as cron jobs can be ran from CI/CD pipelines. And the benefit of that is that you can standardize and centralize the management of running those scripts. And you can control things like security much better than having flat files on a Linux server or Windows server sitting out there with credentials possibly in the files or other sensitive information. So there's a lot of really neat ways that we can handle things with CI/CD. So start learning CI/CD pipelines. Number 9, start playing around with free cloud tier environments. I started doing this back in the day with the free tier of AWS, and now all of the cloud providers have some variant of that. But just make sure that with the free cloud tier, you understand that there are certain resources that are still not free, even in that free tier. And then also understand that you are responsible if you don't secure things out in the cloud and someone uses a cloud resource that you have and they run up thousands of dollars worth of compute charges or network charges. It always falls back on you to secure those things. So don't be afraid of it, but use it in a very mature way. And then I would say finally, my best piece of advice transitioning to DevOps is to start thinking like a DevOps engineer. So we mentioned it in step 1. How can I automate this process, or how can I change this process from being a traditional sneakernet copying files between servers? How can I automate that? Or better yet, how can I put that in a CI/CD pipeline? And when a developer wants to release a new version of their application, how can I have that pipeline automatically test that package and then have it first deploy to maybe a development server? Test out the app there, then we know it's ready to deploy. Then think about deploying it to production. When you start thinking along those lines, you're thinking like a DevOps engineer. And you will be amazed at how your thought process will change based on those just simple tweaks in the way you think about things. So those are just my thoughts and tips on how to transition from being a traditional engineer in the IT field to being a DevOps engineer. And if you're wanting to take on more of those types of roles, I think those tips are great ways to get your feet wet with the processes, the thinking, tooling, all of those things to help you make that transition. And one thing I wanted to mention as well, 2 great resources. And I started rereading this book as I had not read it in quite a while. But the first book that I would recommend for anyone interested in DevOps is The Phoenix Project. This is a tremendously great book that takes you into a fictional company situation where they do things the traditional way and things are just a nightmare to manage. The company's in trouble, and then you follow along as the team adopts and starts using DevOps processes and how it's a game changer. And then following closely along with that, another great resource written by the same group of authors that wrote the Phoenix Project is the DevOps Handbook. And now they've got the 2nd edition out. I have both of those publications pulled back out for myself personally and going back through some of the ideas and methodologies there. Great reads. You'll definitely benefit from those publications. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this pilot episode of Between the Clouds. Please stay tuned for the next episode where I dive into even more topics. Also, look forward to special guests on the show in the future. Stay safe out there, keep tuned in, and I will see you guys soon.